Welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is your program with religious liberty views and opinions from the US and around the world. And my guest on this program, by the way, I'm Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest is Carmela Monk Crawford. I always hesitate on your name because I knew you when it was just a one, not hyphenated, editor of Message magazine. And when this is shown, I don't know, but as we're recording this, the Supreme Court just brought in, or at least the news came in, of a Supreme Court decision, which probably, like many of them, is not a real decision, but the end of the process, on something that we've spoken about for years on this program. That's right. The shorthand thing is the cake case, the gays and the cake maker.
That's right.
Right. What are your thoughts on this? And I know you have an article coming up.
Yeah, no, we recently had an
article
regarding the cake case, the let them have cake case for us. And it was a great opportunity to talk about or weigh the different interests behind a scenario that may implicate your personal beliefs as against somebody else's. And it's one of those things that you have to take and analyze, not only to know what the law says, but to know where you stand. Yeah. So what does the law say when someone asks you to do something or perform a service for them, and that goes against your own personal religious beliefs? Yeah. And that was the question that our author explored. And, you know, he was coming down on the side, you know, wondering what would the Supreme Court say. I haven't heard the opinion yet. I haven't read it yet.
We just know something came down.
We know that there was a decision that was made today, but the balancing the interest between that personal, that baker there in Colorado and the gay couple that came and asked for a wedding cake. And the baker says, no, I can't do this. This is against my personal religious beliefs. In the Colorado, I believe it's the Civil Rights Commission, if I'm something like that, I believe. And they said, no, you don't have to do that. But the question is, what grounds could he refuse to make that case?
And this is not it's worth reminding our viewers, this is not the first time around on this type of conscience refusal. Yeah. Remember, there was an issue of contraceptive medicines and products from a pharmacist. Would he fulfill a prescription on something that he disagreed with? And
just a few years ago, because you wrote this article for us regarding the court clerk in Kentucky who didn't want to sign the
not all of these
license.
Are created equal, because you know, she was not in a regular employment. This was a position that she she was voted in, and there were other options. She didn't have to do it, but she would not even allow her underlings to perform this. Right. And it's worth remembering too, most people forget, it's not a matter of what your church thinks on religious accommodation. It's, are you conscience bound on this? If you hold a conscience position, even if you're a minority of one, in theory, you're to be accommodated. But this runs up against really just public interchange. Can you run a public service, a store, and so on? And for reasons that outsiders might find random or inconsistent or prejudicial even, you're just going to say, I'm not going to serve you, go elsewhere. Right. Which could be huge, not with cakes. I think you can live without cakes, even a wedding cake maybe. Yes. But in some cases, you might deprive that person of that service or whatever you're providing. Right. But I have an opinion on this, because I don't think the Bible, the New Testament in particular, gives license to people to, just because they don't like the color of someone's leprosy, that you say, no, I won't serve you. You're unclean. Go away. Right. What I've said, and I think I told you privately, from my view of how this works, if a gay couple came to a Christian who had huge moral reservations about what they've chosen for their life, and, you know, God doesn't compel, so, you know, they can make bad choices. But if they came to me and I was running a cake shop, I would say, well, thank you for coming to my store. And they would identify themselves, and you'd say, no, you know, you may not know, but I'm a deeply committed Christian, And my Bible has a lot to say about the lifestyle you've chosen, and I certainly don't support that. Mm-hmm. But you've come and asked me to make a cake. I will do that for you, but I have to tell you, I might not be your best choice. I really couldn't do the full justice that you might be expecting on this service.
Right. Well, would you want to patronize my shop, given that is my belief, or that is my view of your choice?
Maybe I didn't say it correctly, but I think that could be said in a way that's not personally offensive, but clarifies the situation. And in the real world, 9 times out of 10, first of all, they wouldn't knowingly come on these sort of things, photographers and cakes. You go where someone's simpatico. That's the whole point of it. This is not just a product. It's a service of someone that's going to really run with your plan, you know?
Yes.
So first of all, they're not so likely to come to a known Christian cake maker. Then if he makes it plain that he has principles, that he's not really on a wavelength, they're likely to go elsewhere. There's no legal liability in that. But particularly in light of what the US went through in the civil rights era, to exclude someone just because you have what amounts to a prejudice, it might be doctrinally informed, it leads in a dangerous direction, in my view.
Yes. And I believe, just like in the civil rights movement, I don't know if they knew, but there are cases that you would take and you would advance because, you know, this is a case that we want to make a point or a rule of law or a point of law. And that could be what has happened here, and I believe that's what will happen coming out as we read the case, the text of the case. Like I said, I didn't read it. But I do agree with you that you have your own personal opinions and your own personal beliefs. The question is, how do you relate to the rest of the world? This is going to be a rub that we're going to see over and over again. What point? Where do you stop? Where do they begin? Where do they begin?
And then there's another part to it that you haven't heard me in full song on this, but it's worth thinking about. In the US and the West in general, where we have certainly since the Enlightenment and the whole democratic period, you know, the US is not the only democratic country in the world, but in its constitution, it embodies it in a more self-conscious way than most others. But, you know, in our Western democratic era, we understand that free speech and religion is going to be protected. But when you're talking about religion, religious commitment, it's not really necessary that you always be given an accommodation.
Right.
Jesus said that all who live a godly life will suffer persecution. And there may be instances, in fact there really are, even now, in many instances in daily life, you take a penalty. It could be not being thought as well of by your worldly neighbours who don't identify with it. Oh, you know, it's a bit unusual. It could be if you're a shopkeeper, you get penalised. The Hobby Lobby owners who got a Supreme Court exemption for their not wanting to offer a service to their employees who may or may not have shared their religious viewpoint. You know, they made someone else pay the cost. But all that was at stake for them was they would have paid an equivalent fine to the value of what they should have been providing. Right. There's a penalty, sometimes just an inconvenience. If you read Fox's Book of Martyrs, sometimes you lost your life over it. And going into any commitment, particularly a faith commitment, if it's worth it, you have to be prepared to pay whatever it takes.
Right, right.
And I think people are forgetting that.
Right.
They think that an entitlement should be yours regardless of, and the lawyers all know that religious liberty is not an absolute in society. There's a balancing. Right. Your freedom, if it restricts someone else greatly, is you know, the civil society can't allow that in an unrestricted manner.
Right, right. And you can only accommodate to a certain point. You can't always be expected to accommodate, and you can't always expect the accommodation for yourself. And you're right. If you're going to stand on commitment, you have to be prepared to reckon with what the fallout or the consequences may be. Unfortunately, sometimes
I've dealt with religious liberty for so long, and I really appreciate how message keeps coming at this topic too, as you should, because it's a legitimate part of it. But when there's compulsion involved, it breaks the principle. And in essence, you can be creating that compulsion by your privileged position. I'm mixing another Supreme Court case, but I really think that the Hobby Lobby case, you know, it was settled by the Supreme Court to a legal point, but I think it was an injustice in advance to people who might have made a choice to it, or even if they agreed with the Hobby Lobby owners. Here, legally, they've been forced to go along with their view ahead of time before they've made their moral choice.
That's right. That's right.
And I'm not happy with that. I'm not comfortable with that.
No, and we have to, and I think we have to get to the point where we are comfortable being around and expressing our differing and conflicting opinions with other people. Now, you hear people all the time saying that, but it doesn't work out so well in the public fare, you know, trying to express your opinion and still being human and decent about it. You know, like, and that's why I like your example, you know, if somebody had come to me, what could I say and how could I say it? And I believe that goes a long way to creating some understanding and, in some cases, some changes of opinion. And the
thing that I told you privately, but it troubles me, and I don't run a store, but, you know, if you do anything that deals with the general public, you have to know, at least intellectually, you can't prove in many cases, but through that door, in any given day, have to come wife beaters, child abusers, thieves of different nature, people that are cheating on their tax.
Yes, yes.
It's a wide array. People that have just gone to a strip club or whatever, or you know, over and over, things that on a gamut of discolorations on moral behavior and even illegal behavior. But you don't know unless they self-identify and make it an issue with you in discussion. You have to treat them all as Jesus would have treated people. And, you know, the charge against Jesus was that he kept company with publicans and sinners.
Well, the people always used to ask me when I practiced law and did a little criminal defense law, people always ask me, how can you defend these people, especially these people that you know are guilty? And it's true, at any point you can have somebody who would do something you would never think about and would not want to associate with that person if you did know. I mean, that's not your
You're getting onto the lawyer's conundrum there.
No, but I guess my point, though, is the same point, is that there is a greater principle at work as well. And so for me, in the legal realm, I believe in that person's constitutional right to having a person, an advocate, a zealous
someone
advocate.
that can speak their position.
But you know, when we're talking about the religious liberty issue, the greater issue, or the thing that I want to protect most, is that conscience, that freedom of conscience, and that ability to arrive at whatever decision based on your conscience. I'm not going to force that, and I'm not going to refuse it so that it is a de facto compulsion, as you've said.
But I dropped the term before, but I think that's the stand-in for religious freedom anymore. It's entitlement.
Yes.
A religious entitlement is not true religious freedom. It's a legal track for how you think, with no or little concern for other people.
Right.
Well, let's take a break there. Please stay with us. There's plenty more to discuss, and we'll be back in a few moments with the Liberty Insider. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, with editor Carmela of Message Magazine. I need to give an advertisement for your magazine. One of the best. Liberty's at least as good, but Message. No, I always appreciated Message Magazine. You've had some consistently, not just under your editorship, but you've continued very thought-provoking articles, I believe.
The respect goes both ways.
Well,
I appreciate
that.
that.
But we were talking about a recent decision, and we know little about the decision itself, but a lot about the background on the so-called cake case, which is really just one skirmish on a growing conflict, it seems to many people, between gay rights and religious rights. Do you think it has to be that way? Should there be, or is of necessity there a conflict between this new civil right for this group and religious freedom rights?
I know many people think that there has to be a conflict. Many people think that there will be a problem when you recognize a legal union between gays. And many people on the other side want to also make sure that their union is sanctioned by God in the house of worship, in a Christian church. Yeah. I don't have a large opinion on it. I do believe, and I've been reading lately, and indeed our church, our religious faith, has gone through great lengths to not only investigate, but to interview and figure out what it is. How can we be more sensitive? How can we be more welcoming in a way that does not compromise tenets of our faith in general? At the same time, though, I don't see it's not easy necessarily to reconcile the two. I'm of the personal mindset, though, if there is a civil right to be had, and if a person has a right to a certain thing, they should be able to have that regardless.
Well, I think there's a reasonable discussion as to whether this society should have granted that right. I think it was perhaps a mistake, but it's settled civil law now. And so for people of Christian or any faith to challenge law because they don't like it, as opposed to challenging a law that asks them to forsake their higher loyalty, is a bit dangerous, because that's people of faith meddling in civil governance. Even though they see a strong moral component, well, I'm going to give an example, and it was contradiction even as I thought about it.
Right.
But when you drove here, you drove past Larry Flint's Hustlers Club, and I know Christians.
I didn't notice it, just to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've driven too many times not to notice it, because he was in the news when I first started.
Right.
It's true. Some Christians have gotten out front of those sort of groups and abortion clinics and made their objections known, and that's fine. But unless you think this is a Christian republic in a governmental sense, which many people do, I don't see how a Christian can say, I don't like that law. This is not the theocracy that I want, so therefore, you can't have it. Normally, a Christian should only object to laws per se that restrict their worship of God.
Right.
So it seems to me this is people launching forth into social experiments, basically. And goodness knows the state is in a big one with adopting the gay marriage, I think. I wrote an editorial once and I said, this is a massive experiment. They have no idea how it'll affect cost of social, medical for the society, the diseases, inheritance. You just go on and on. I saw a television program once that played off on the idea of that old poem, for want of a nail, a shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, a horse was lost. For want of a horse, a battle was lost. For want of a battle, a kingdom was lost. The king's horse came up lame. And little things can have huge ramifications.
Right.
And so the gay marriage allowance in the state may have its own punishment, if you like. It's disruptive. But Christians need to deal with a sinfully disrupted society. We need to let our light shine, not slash away, as thinking that we're going to set it all straight and that we're Jehu and our chariot can charge through this and that area.
And the thing is, I just don't. There's not a clear or an easy rule for me. No. When I hear you say that, yes, because maybe we have similar backgrounds religiously, I get that. I get where you are. At the same time, there's a human right, and I do see the parallel in this instance when we're talking about the civil rights movement. As a rule, I can't say don't get involved in certain things. Don't assert certain things because of your personal preference or your moral belief. I don't know there's a rule that I can't do.
I'll throw you a real curve.
Okay.
And already you figured I can do it. How does this structurally differ from what most of us are uncomfortable with? The call from some Islamic majority communities in America that they would like Sharia law. We find that socially troublesome, not just from a religious point of view, but undergirding the expectation on the cake and all the rest is that as a Christian community, we are just going to prohibit anything that offends our practice of religion. That's what it boils down to, doesn't it?
Sometimes not. And I know I sound like a lawyer, really.
Well,
here,
no, you need to sound like a lawyer.
Sometimes. I think that, in the case if we were talking Sharia law, I mean, on one hand, you could make a good argument that the government that is in locally based, that is the seat of government, that is it rests with those elected, it rests with them. And so on one hand, you can say to have another body that officiates, makes their own laws, and to rise to that and take on that responsibility for themselves, that is problematic in any government or any society.
Well, you're
on one
superimposing one legal system on
another.
another.
Yes. But at the same time, though, you think about the Santeria case, if I could say that the right way, if I pronounced it correctly. We're not going to target or attack any one group because of who they are. We're not going to make laws that are directed toward them. So, there's always...
Well, there's a lot of subtleties on this,
yes,
you're right.
There's always a nuance that, it is hard. And I don't think we should at any point approach people or situations with that broad brush rule. And I believe that's the way Jesus would want us to do. It's just to be more individual. I'm talking to you. What are your needs? What are the things that you feel that you need to be a part of this society? Where do I fit in? How do you relate to me? How do I relate to you? And how can I make the institutions around be inclusive of you and your needs and your family's needs?
Yeah, and you've pretty much described the goal of a Christian presence in a society to be not just within a closed area, but to reach out and to make a difference. We like to think that Christianity does that automatically, but probably not unless you make the effort I know the pioneer of our church, Ellen White, when she lived in Australia, said that she took flowers and cakes and stuff to her neighbours, reached out.
Right.
And
I love it when you say that. I
don't know that we should take cakes to this group, but
I believe there needs to be a lot more, though. If we're talking, we're talking about it. And if I could just say that recently they've come out with a whole study, the whole social science. And they've discovered the loneliness epidemic. Have you read about this? The loneliness epidemic, where people do not have any interaction. They do not have close friends that they can talk to, much less any heartfelt or deep discussion of anything that matters to people. And that hurts us as a whole.
Well, I think that's one of the key elements at the root of a collapse of a coherent society. Mm-hmm. It's not just an emotional deficit for the individuals. You can't have a society sustain long when people are not bound to other people strongly. Right.
I love that, the way you said that. Have you heard I heard a study, an experiment not long ago. I thought it was very interesting, where they set up a man in a room to do it. And they said, we want you to go on the computer. We want you to play catch with 2 other people. Did you see that?
No, but I know the dynamic you're talking about.
Right. Well, he's supposed to toss the ball. After a while, he's playing with them, and the other people stop tossing the ball to him, and they're playing together. And they have the man's head, his brain is set up with nodes and monitors and everything. And they realized that the hurt that he felt when the imaginary people, because
I thought it was something else you were saying, but I hadn't seen that.
It was 2 computers that he was playing with. It wasn't other people. And so they programmed the computer to stop throwing the ball to him. The rejection and the pain that he felt.
Well, we've all been there in grade school. You're not picked on the team or a little later than you are.
It registered in his brain the same place as your pain center.
Yeah.
And so if you want to get rid of that and feel better, you take a Tylenol.
And there's no question the true religion and the religion that Jesus brought was to relieve those pain centers, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I believe there's something that every one of us could do, and I would like to be able to make sure that the people around me recognize what it means to be able to reach out to people. The loneliness, the massacres, the violence can be stopped, and it can all stop with me if I intervene.
Food and baking is an important part of life, and when you think spiritual things, or at least religious history, it pops up periodically. I think of Gideon meeting the angel and the cakes were baked on a hot stone. I think of hospitality being extended, which involved baking and other things. Abraham and the visitors that came turned out to be angels. And I wonder sometimes, Christian bakers, cake makers and others, how do they know whether they're entertaining angels or the regular sinners? And while the Supreme Court have taken a good protective decision, we need to look more and more at how we are charitably extending the hospitality to others, unbelievers even, that cakes and food and the common human occurrences remind us of. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.